Hey everybody, it is math time. We are going to be learning about comparing fractions with unlike denominators. So for example this morning, I have 2/3 being compared to 4/5. The denominators are not the same. 3 and 5 are not the same numbers. So when we compare fractions with like denominators, that makes it a lot easier because we know that if we look at a fraction that's 2/3 and 1/3, if it's broken into thirds, we know that the greater thirds is going to be the correct answer, or the larger fraction. But when we have unlike denominators, we have to figure something out. We have to figure out a common thing. So the first thing I want to look at is if we do the model strategy, like if we were to use fraction strips like we have in class. So the model strategy looks like this. Basically, they have the same whole. So if you have one whole and you break it into different parts, but you can compare the sizes, it makes it pretty easy. So we have this whole here, and then we have the same size whole, but it's broken into thirds. Everybody say thirds. So we have two of them shaded in, which represents 2/3. So it takes up this much of the whole. If we take the 4/5 and we divide the same whole into 5 pieces, or fifths, everybody say fifths, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 shaded, so now we've made 4/5. And then we can compare the two, and obviously 4/5 is the larger fraction because it takes up more of the whole. So our gator mouth points to 4/5, all done. But today I want to break away from that strategy because we don't have this available to us all the time. Okay? What we do have available to us is our multiplication strategies. So let's move on to a different strategy, and this is when we find a common denominator. So we'll use the same example again, 2/3 versus 4/5, but this time we're going to try to find a common denominator. So the denominator obviously is always the number that's on the bottom. It's the number of pieces that we're counting. So we're going to be comparing 2/3 to 4/5 again, but trying to find a common denominator so that we can compare, because when we have like denominators, comparing the fraction is so much easier because then we see how many pieces. All we have to do is count the pieces that are shaded, because the denominator, or the number of pieces there are, is the same. So finding a common denominator, we're going to go step by step here. All right, so 2/3 and 4/5. We have to ask ourselves, what common multiple do 3 and 5 share? I'm going to zoom in on that question. So it says, what common multiple do 3 and 5 share? So I'm going to be counting the multiples, and we're going to try to find them together. So it says, if we go down here and we look at 3 and we look at 5 and we count their multiples, okay, we know that 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, those are multiples of 3. Then 5 are 5, 10, 15, and 20. So we have all of the multiples of 3 and of 5 listed so that we can find the common one. You'll notice here I circled the 15 because both 3 and 5 share 15. And most of us know because 3 times 5 is 15 and 5 times 3 is 15. So I put sweet. So now we're ready to find the common denominator. So the way we do this now, let's see our whole paper now, is we take whatever it is you have to multiply 3 by to get that 15. And whatever you have to multiply 5 by to get that 15. And we just decided that 3 times 5 is 15, 5 times 3 is 15. Now, when you're finding any equivalent fraction, which is what we're trying to do here, we're trying to find an equivalent fraction to 2/3 and an equivalent fraction to 4/5 in order to compare the two that have like denominators. So if I were to turn thirds into 15ths, I would have to multiply both the denominator and the numerator by the same number, which in this case is 5, because 3 times 5 is 15. So then we have to do 2 times 5, which is 10. So then we have to come over here with the 4/5 and decide, what do we have to multiply 5 by? Well, 5 times 3 is 15, so then we have to do the same thing to the numerator. So 4 times 3 is 12. So now we have 2 new fractions. They're equivalent, which means they're the same, but they have a common denominator now. So much easier to compare them. So 2/3, which has now become 10/15, and 12/15, which is, or excuse me, 4/5, which has now become 12/15. So much easier to compare those two. Let me zoom in on those guys down there. So now to compare 10/15 and 12/15 is a piece of cake, because 15ths are the same. They're the same part of the whole. So we know that 12/15 is more than 10/15. So our gator mouth would point to the greater fraction. Therefore, 4/5 is larger than 2/3. So we would say, if we were to read this correctly, we would say 2/3 is what, everybody? Less than 4/5.